So when you're doing healing work, there's a couple of steps, but the first part usually involves tracking. And tracking is just a nice way of saying using divination to uncover the layers of the problem, the root of the problem. Because every time you do a healing in animism, you don't do exactly the same things each time. So there's a bunch of different ways to divine for this, but I'm just going to use cards because they're visual and I'm trained to do that. So the first layer that a lot of us know about is the child or personality. This is what you might do with a soul retrieval or other types of healings where you're going back and kind of undoing a wound that happened in the person's past. So that layer is pretty commonly understood. Then the next layer gets a little more complicated is, okay, you've done that layer, the person still has problems, they're repetitive problems, then you might want to try the ancestral layer. The ancestral layer has a lot of momentum because it's a wound that's been passed down through generations. So it's almost like a wave that's building up strength until it kind of crashes over the person you're working on. And it can be very intense in the sense that they get to a certain point and then boom. So it's like a pattern where things start to get better, they get better, and then boom. You know, and usually it's based on an ancestral pattern where an ancestor decided that they were going to be punished for being too successful, or something along those lines, or they didn't like how their life turned out because they used their power the wrong way, or they made a bad agreement with spirit helpers, something like that. The next layer is a little more complicated because everyone agrees that this is a factor, but everyone doesn't see it the same way. Soul. Now, on the soul level, in many cultures, there's a belief that the soul is actually complicated, that there are actually multiple souls that make up a human being, and instead of like one soul, like what we think. And so a lot of healing relates to the soul, or to a type of soul part. But in certain traditions, there's also an idea that you can reincarnate. Now, there's different ideas about how much of the essence can reincarnate. Like in some places, it's like the kind of reincarnation that we associate with Hinduism. In other places, it's more like people reincarnate along family lines. But you're talking about an extra layer of not just something that's passed down through the ancestors, but that has to do with the essence of the person having lived before, done something, or been a part of something, and now you're working on that healing now. And then finally, the other layer that can be coming into play is a more modern idea, which is that of the shadow self. Now, this is something that Angeles Arian talks about, and a lot of other people work on it. Erica Buenaflor does some work with it. Some of the traditions work with shadow work, and it's usually has to do with certain deities that are associated with shadow work. Alberto Villoldo, I think, associates it with a deity that is like a large cat. It's done differently in different cultures. But the idea of the shadow self is that there are parts of us that we hide because we don't want to be unloved. And these can be both healthy and unhealthy aspects. And the truly unhealthy thing that's going on is the idea that we have to create this false idea of who we are. So the shadow work is a way of liberating these unloved parts and bringing them back into the personality so that you can free up that energy and be a more healthy and complete being. And with this, in some traditions, you work with the directions, as well as with these powerful spirit helpers. So with each one of these layers, it's going to be someplace in the energy field. Because many people work with the chakras, I'm just going to talk about the fifth chakra. So let's say that one of these layers was happening in the fifth chakra. On the child layer, it could be that the person was shamed for speaking out or speaking their truth. On the ancestral layer, it could be that a person was a gifted speaker or a gifted a person who can convince people with the power of their words or their voice or their music, and somehow they felt that this went badly for them, whether it was their fault or someone else's fault. So they bury that gift. That's an ancestral pattern. A soul pattern would be a past lifetime where these things happened, and then they're happening again in the present lifetime, like an echo. So that's another area. And then shadow self could be you're basically either misusing, like, let's say you're a rebel. You're rebelling all the time, speaking out all the time, but you're not using your voice to understand what having power and responsibility really means. Or on the flip side, you don't speak up and you're kind of a victim and you let other people speak for you. And in this, you would need the power of the directions or the beings that do shadow work to help liberate your voice, because your voice, whether it's loved or not, at that moment is a part of you or me and everyone else, and needs to be active. So these are just like very superficial ways of looking at how some of these wound layers could help the impact the fifth chakra, and this can be happening with any part of the body. So I hope that this is helpful with tracking, and I look forward to hearing about your experiences. Thank you.